What would you do if you discovered that your family's entire fortune was built on the most horrific crime imaginable, and the evidence of that crime was hidden right under your nose for your entire life? This is the shocking true story of how Emma Blackwood uncovered a 70-year-old secret that destroyed everything she thought she knew about her family and led to one of the most disturbing revelations in modern criminal history. Emma had always been proud of her family's legacy. The Blackwoods were one of the most respected families in their small New England town, known for their philanthropy, their successful businesses, and their beautiful historic mansion that had been in the family for 3 generations. Emma's grandfather, William Blackwood, had built the family fortune through what everyone believed was shrewd real estate investments and a successful import business in the 1950s and 60s. Growing up, Emma heard countless stories about her grandfather's business acumen and his rise from humble beginnings to becoming one of the wealthiest men in the region. He had died when Emma was only 5 years old, but his legend lived on through family stories, newspaper clippings, and the various charitable foundations that bore his name. The family had always been private about the specific details of how William had made his money, attributing it to his preference for discretion and his belief that wealth should be used to help others rather than for self-promotion. Emma, now 32 and working as an art restoration specialist, had recently inherited the family mansion after her parents died in a car accident. While going through the house to prepare it for renovation, she decided to explore areas that had been off-limits during her childhood. Her grandfather had converted the mansion's basement into his private office and storage area, and after his death, her father had simply locked it up, saying it contained old business records that weren't important anymore. The basement office was like stepping back in time. Everything had been preserved exactly as William had left it, from the 1960s-era furniture to the vintage business equipment. Emma was initially charmed by the nostalgic atmosphere and began cataloging items that might have historical or sentimental value. She found old photographs of her grandfather with various business associates, contracts from his import company, and dozens of filing cabinets filled with what appeared to be routine business correspondence. It was while examining some of the photographs more closely that Emma first noticed something strange. Many of the pictures showed her grandfather with men who didn't look like typical American businessmen of the era. They were older, distinguished-looking European men, and several of the photos appeared to have been taken in what looked like luxurious European settings rather than in America. What puzzled Emma most was that these photos were dated from the late 1940s and early 1950s, but according to family history, her grandfather hadn't started his business until the mid-1950s and had never traveled to Europe. Emma's curiosity was further piqued when she found a locked safe hidden behind a bookshelf. The safe was old and substantial, clearly installed when the office was originally constructed. Emma spent days trying different combinations before finally succeeding with a combination based on her grandfather's birth date. What she found inside the safe would haunt her for the rest of her life. The safe contained dozens of documents written in German, along with photographs, jewelry, and what appeared to be official Nazi Party documentation. Among the papers were identification documents for her grandfather, but under a completely different name, Wilhelm Schwarzkopf. The documents indicated that Wilhelm Schwarzkopf had been an officer in the SS and had been involved in the operation of concentration camps during World War II. Emma's world began to crumble as she realized that her beloved grandfather, the family patriarch she had always admired, had apparently been a Nazi war criminal who had somehow escaped justice and built a new life in America. But the documents in the safe revealed something even more horrifying than she could have imagined. Among the German documents were detailed inventories of items that had been confiscated from concentration camp prisoners. The lists included jewelry, artwork, gold teeth, and other valuables that had been stolen from victims before they were murdered. Cross-referencing these lists with other documents in the safe, Emma discovered that her grandfather had not only participated in these thefts but had somehow managed to smuggle a significant portion of these stolen items out of Germany at the end of the war. The family's entire fortune, everything Emma had inherited, everything that had funded their comfortable lifestyle and charitable giving for 3 generations, had been built on the blood money stolen from Holocaust victims. The beautiful antiques that decorated their mansion, the jewelry that had been passed down through the family, even the land the mansion sat on, had all been purchased with money that rightfully belonged to families who had been murdered in concentration camps. Emma found detailed records showing how her grandfather had systematically sold these stolen items over the course of decades, using the proceeds to build his legitimate businesses and establish the family's reputation in their community. He had been incredibly careful and methodical, selling items in different cities and states to avoid detection, and always maintaining the facade of a successful legitimate businessman. The documentation also revealed that William Blackwood was not the only Nazi war criminal who had escaped to their area after the war. There had been an entire network of former SS officers and Nazi officials who had settled in New England, helping each other establish new identities and build new lives while their victims' families spent decades searching for them and for justice. Emma discovered correspondence between her grandfather and at least 6 other former Nazi officials who had settled in nearby towns. They had maintained contact for decades, sharing information about how to avoid detection and even coordinating business deals using their stolen wealth. Some of these men had become prominent members of their communities, serving on school boards, funding local charities, and being respected as upstanding citizens, all while hiding their horrific past. The most disturbing discovery was a detailed journal that her grandfather had kept, documenting not only his financial activities but also his thoughts and feelings about what he had done during the war. Rather than expressing remorse or guilt, the journal revealed a man who felt justified in his actions and believed that he deserved the wealth and status he had achieved in America. He wrote about the concentration camp prisoners as if they had been merely inconveniences, and he expressed pride in his ability to escape justice and build a successful new life. Emma also found evidence that her grandfather had not acted alone in his escape from Europe. He had been part of an organized network that helped Nazi war criminals flee to South America and North America after the war. This network, apparently funded by stolen wealth, had provided false documentation, transportation, and assistance in establishing new identities for dozens of war criminals. The revelation that her family's wealth came from Holocaust victims was devastating enough, but Emma also discovered that the cover-up had continued into the next generation. Her father had known the truth about his father's past and the source of the family's wealth, but had chosen to keep it secret rather than face the consequences of exposing it. Documents in the safe showed that her father had even helped dispose of some of the most incriminating evidence when Nazi hunters had gotten close to identifying her grandfather in the 1970s. Emma realized that she was now faced with an impossible choice. She could keep her family's secret and continue living comfortably off blood money, or she could expose the truth and lose everything while potentially facing legal consequences for her family's crimes. The stolen wealth had been laundered through so many legitimate transactions over the decades that much of it might be legally unrecoverable, but the moral implications were clear. After weeks of agonizing over the decision, Emma chose to do the right thing. She contacted the FBI and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, turning over all the evidence she had discovered. She also reached out to organizations that work to return stolen Holocaust assets to survivors and their families, offering to cooperate fully in identifying the rightful owners of the stolen items. The investigation that followed was extensive and international in scope. The FBI worked with German authorities, Holocaust researchers, and victim advocacy groups to verify the authenticity of the documents Emma had provided and to trace the stolen items to their original owners. The case reopened investigations into several other suspected Nazi war criminals who had lived in the United States, and led to the discovery of additional stolen assets that had been hidden for decades. Emma's decision to come forward also led to the identification of several families whose relatives had been murdered in the concentration camps where her grandfather had served. Through painstaking genealogical research and historical investigation, authorities were able to connect some of the stolen items to specific victims and return them to surviving family members or their descendants. The legal process was complex and emotionally draining. Emma had to testify before multiple courts and investigative bodies, reliving the horrific details of what she had discovered over and over again. She faced criticism from some community members who felt she should have kept the family secret, while others praised her courage in coming forward despite the personal cost. Financially, Emma lost almost everything. The family mansion was seized by authorities as evidence, and most of the family's assets were frozen pending the outcome of various legal proceedings. Items that could be definitively traced to Holocaust victims were returned to their rightful owners or their families, while other assets were liquidated and the proceeds donated to Holocaust education and victim support organizations. The emotional toll was enormous. Emma had to come to terms with the fact that the grandfather she had idolized was actually a monster who had participated in genocide. She struggled with guilt over having unknowingly benefited from the suffering of Holocaust victims for her entire life. She also faced the challenge of rebuilding her life from scratch, both financially and emotionally. However, Emma found purpose in her decision to expose the truth. She began working with Holocaust education organizations, sharing her story to help people understand how Nazi war criminals had escaped justice and built new lives in America. She also became an advocate for the return of stolen Holocaust assets and worked to support legislation that would make it easier to identify and recover stolen cultural property. Emma's story led to significant changes in how authorities investigate and prosecute cases involving stolen Holocaust assets. Her case demonstrated the importance of thorough investigation of suspicious wealth accumulation by immigrants from Nazi Germany, and led to new protocols for handling cases where stolen assets have been laundered through legitimate businesses over many decades. The case also had broader implications for understanding the scope of Nazi war criminals who escaped to America after the war. Emma's evidence helped researchers and law enforcement agencies identify patterns in how these criminals operated and how they managed to avoid detection for so long. This information has been used to reopen other cold cases and has led to the discovery of additional war criminals who had previously escaped identification. Today, Emma lives modestly but with a clear conscience. She works as a volunteer researcher for organizations that help identify and return stolen Holocaust assets to their rightful owners. She has written a book about her experience that has become an important resource for understanding how the consequences of the Holocaust extended far beyond the war itself and continued to affect families for generations. Emma often speaks at schools and universities about the importance of confronting difficult truths about family history and the dangers of allowing war criminals to escape justice. She emphasizes that ignoring or covering up crimes against humanity only allows the suffering of victims to continue and prevents society from learning the lessons necessary to prevent future genocides. The most important lesson from Emma's story is that the truth has a way of eventually coming to light, even after decades of successful concealment. Her decision to sacrifice her family's wealth and reputation to do the right thing demonstrates that it's never too late to seek justice for victims of historical crimes, even when the personal cost is enormous. Emma's courage in exposing her family's dark secret has helped bring closure to families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their murdered relatives and their stolen possessions. While she lost her inheritance and her comfortable lifestyle, she gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that she did everything in her power to honor the memory of the Holocaust victims whose suffering had unknowingly funded her family's prosperity.